Goodman Games. You are in the seminar called How to Write Adventure Modules That Do Not Suck. We'll introduce ourselves and then we'll talk about how to write adventure modules. So Harley, why don't you go first?
Hey guys, I'm Harley Stroh. I've been writing for Goodman Games since DCC 17, and I've had the privilege of participating in some of the latest iteration of Goodman Games Dungeon Crawl Classics. The most recent of which is Journey to the Center of Aerith, and its supplement, The Lost City of Baraka.
I'm Jim Wampler, and I write, edit, and sometimes lay out and art direct for Goodman Games.
And do websites.
And since a couple years ago when I weaseled my way in, author of the Mutant Crawl Classics Kickstarter, and anybody here who backed that, thank you from the bottom of my heart for backing that. And some Purple Planet Adventures and Memoirs of Southwick.
Cool.
I don't know who you are.
My name is Joseph Goodman. I wrote DCC RPG as well as a bunch of adventures for it and some other stuff a long time ago. And I've published a lot of adventures, so my contribution here will be more what I look for in published adventures as opposed to how to write them.
Well, you've written a lot of adventures I actually like, but I'm Joe Goodman. I've written various materials for Wizards of the Coast, Kobold Press, Lamentations of Flame Princess, Goodman Games, and that's probably it.
Hi, I'm Chris Doyle. I've been freelancing since the early 90s. We worked for West End Games until they went out of business, TSR until they went out of business. It's a little bit of a theme there. A little bit of a theme there.
Get out!
For Goodman Games, the last 10 years, I've been writing the 3.0, the 3.5 Dungeon Crawl Classics, and then more recently the 5th edition modules.
And I'm Michael Curtis. I've been with Goodman Games since about 2008 when I kicked things off with Dungeon Alphabet, and since then I've done 12, 15, 20 adventures, something like that, and from anywhere from new material for Old School Judges Guild to 5th edition to Metamorphosis Alpha, and then of course a lot of DCC, and I'm currently the lead writer on DCC Line 1.
So we've done this seminar a couple times, and I figured today, just to shake it up and make it a little different, we would talk. I didn't tell any. So let me tell you guys what we're doing.
I'm shaking up.
Well, you can interpret this how you want, but let's talk about how we've read something that's inspired us and how it sort of channeled our creativity to write something. Because at least from my own experience, when I read, it really sort of focuses me and changes the way I write and changes the idea I think about. That's just a place to start. I'll kick it off, and then we can take questions from you guys, and you can steer us wherever you want to go. Usually when we do this, some people want to write for themselves, other people want to write for publications. This is less about how to get published and more about just how to write exciting, interesting stuff that's fun to play or fun to read. So we'll steer it in that direction. But for me, let me just, now that I kicked off the topic, I'll just say that for me, reading great fiction drives me in a certain way. We all read, some people read game books, some people read fiction, etc. But a lot of times, if I want to write a horror adventure, for example, I go read some Clark Ashton Smith and some Abraham Merritt and some H.P. Lovecraft, and it just gets me in the right frame of mind. Like the vocabulary they use starts to infiltrate my thoughts. I start to think in a certain way, and it's just something I've used to inspire me to get the right mood for an adventure. So a lot of the adventures I write, or if I had this cool idea for an adventure. But a wizard named Thakilon, who became so powerful he could challenge even the gods, and he achieved immortality and could not be defeated by any means. So the gods, to defeat him, since they could not kill him, they chopped his body into 1,000 parts and scattered it amongst the cosmos. So the adventure involves, finally, after many eons, his heart and his brain end up on the same planet and then start to reassemble. And so the adventure is about how do you destroy somebody who literally cannot be destroyed, but he can be sliced up into lots of little pieces. I've been working on this for years now, and it's halfway built in my head. But whenever I feel like working on something, I go read something that sort of is along the themes of sort of horror. It's less about action and more about horror. And that gets my brain thinking in the right way, and that's how I work on that. So some thoughts on how to get your thoughts started on a subject. Do you guys have some more ideas on those subjects? Anyway, to you guys. Sure.
So for me, I'm more of a visual person. What inspires me is artwork. I was working on Journey to the Center of Aerith, and then Doug Kovacs turned in this amazing cover of these elephant-headed gods and like this really almost interwoven staircase thing at the center of the planet. And it made me go back to what I had written, and I gave another 10,000 words to Joseph, trying to live up to that artwork. And I think for a lot of us, we see it's the artwork that inspires us to create a cool story around it. Because we can the art just presents itself, then we can imprint whatever story that we find really passionate or really exciting, you know, into that artwork and build off of it. I'm lucky because I get to work with Doug Kovacs that, you know, he's in-house and I get to be inspired from him. But there's artwork everywhere, right, that we all find exciting, like, oh, that's a sweet image. Let me write a story to that.
I agree very much with what's been said, but I can tell you why. Gary Gygax and Jim Ward and all those guys that wrote the original version of everybody's favorite fantasy game based it all on the pulp fantasy and science fiction paperbacks that they were reading at the time. So that was their primary source. There's a thing that happens with any entertainment, Star Trek, Star Wars, whatever. It's always inspired by some primary source for the creators from that, but as it goes on longer and longer, it becomes more and more self-referential and moves away from the primary sources. And I'm of the personal opinion that the various editions of D&D, subsequent editions of D&D became more and more about D&D rather than the fantasy fiction that inspired it. So I'm exactly with these guys going back. I did that myself for Mutant Crawl Classics, went back and reread things I'd read 30 years ago to get freshened up with them. And a little bit about how to do this yourself and maybe someday get published or self-published. That's the thing that everybody in this room has. We take these guys like Gary Gygax and deify them, and that they were great and did this fantastic, great thing. And thinking of it in that way makes it a challenge that I don't think I'm good enough to do. I don't even think I'm as good a writer as most of these guys up here. But what I do have is my own unique history of the media I've consumed, all floating around in my head, which I can freshen up by going back and rereading it. And that personal fantasy experience I can then put into my works. For example, I go around saying all the time that Mutant Crawl Classics, one of the heavy inspirations for me was the old Jack Kirby comic, Commandy, Last Boy of Earth. Well, when Mutant Crawl Classics comes out and you read it, and if you go back and read the old Jack Kirby comics, on the surface they don't have a lot in common. It's a very Commandy's a very traditional post-apocalypse that happened within a generation after the nuclear war or whatever it was. Commandy himself is the grandson of somebody who lived before those times, where Mutant Crawl Classics is much later in the future. What I took from Jack Kirby was the way he would take a single issue of a comic and cram 8 great ideas into it. Enough ideas for 8 issues, he would put into 1 and then do it again the next issue. And that syncs with what Joseph and these guys do with Dungeon Crawl Classics, where you take a traditional fantasy trope and then crank it up to 11 at the end. That Jack Kirby did that in that comic. Does that make sense? So primary sources are where it's at.
Cool. You guys want to talk about that?
Just other media, like you brought up comic books. I like to watch a lot of like crappy fantasy movies.
We
One
all
of my
do.
favorite things. Yeah, just I don't know. There's usually a lot of just bizarrely bad ideas in there, and but for some reason I like to think about them and see how I can make them better and rip them off and turn them into my own thing.
Yeah, I actually don't get a lot of my inspiration from novels. I actually get it from game books and adventure modules that have been published. I have a huge collection. I've got books from back into the 70s, you know, some of the earliest ones that were published, all the way up to some that were probably published 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I read every single one of them, and I think I get more value out of reading the ones that suck, because then I can find out these are things I don't want to do. And thanks to the Die 20 glut a few years ago, we have lots of material that we can look at and say, yeah, this is something I do not want to do, as well as the old ones. And then definitely my library is fairly expansive, so that, you know, if I'm going to work on a book about hobgoblins or whatever, you know, I'll just pull those old classic ones out that were about hobgoblins and see what they did, and then try and put a little bit of a modern spin on them, but still kind of throw it back to the old school as well. So sometimes it's important to read the good and the bad, much like you like the old crappy movies. Sometimes you can get something out of it. And then the only other thing I'll just quickly throw in there for inspiration is I keep with me, it's actually in my backpack, a notebook where I write notes down, where I hit inspiration at any time, middle of the night, you know, watching Sesame Street with my kid, you know, you get an idea or just something will just trigger something, and I've gotten to the age now where if I don't write it down, it's gone. So it's like, write it down, record it, whatever. Everybody's got a smartphone now. I mean, that's like a great thing too, because you never know when you might need that little tidbit or something that you can weave into an adventure or something, or make a story complete.
I mean, I'm well versed, obviously, in our fantasy, our heritage and so have you. But to be honest, well, especially after reading Fritz Leiber 2.5 times for the last year, I've actually been eschewing basically straight fantasy a lot lately, and for the most part, I just try to read everything under the sun because I never try to find. My background is I have a degree in English Lit and a minor in comparative religion, so I'm pretty much used to drawing from all sorts of sources. Shane Coffin for one. Shane Coffin it draws a lot on Manly Wave Ellen, which is Appendix N, but there's also a good amount of William Faulkner's As I Lay Dying in there as well. So I hate to kind of pigeonhole myself. It's kind of, as Chris said, there's Sesame Street you can find an idea from. So anything from Finnish mythology, which actually Gygax pulled a lot from. The Old God's Return, that actually goes into a lot of Finnish and Scandinavian mythology for Christmas adventure. And I'm a big armchair historic in French and Indian War, especially in the northeast of the United States. That stuff fascinates me, and that kind of trickles down into my work as well. So there's no any one single place where you're going to get inspiration from. So don't be afraid just to limit yourself to sci-fi or fantasy or whatever you want to call it. So
I was thinking maybe we could take a couple questions on this topic, and then we'll sort of move on to the next topic. Anybody have any questions on the subject of inspirations or media or books or things like that?
What's the next topic?
I'll tell you in a couple minutes.
I have a question. The thing about media and novels and all of that, those tend to be fairly under the creator's control. And by that I mean you have a character, the character undergoes certain things, what happens and in what order is under the author's control. The thing about taking inspiration and turning it into an adventure is that I'm handing it off to people who are going to take this into directions that I never expected. Do you have any ideas for how to, how would you convert something that really, really inspired you in a piece of literature and assess, well, is this something that I can build into my adventure, or is this something that only works if I have complete creative control over this?
well, I think it depends actually on what you're running. I think if you're running like Firefly, the role-playing game, and everybody else is familiar with the source material, everybody's going to be kind of on the same boat. So at least the kind of the established there's some sort of parameters established as a social contract amongst the group. It's like we're not suddenly going to turn this into well, actually Firefly can pretty much turn into anything. It's still but yeah, that's something that's I'm sure we'll touch on that before this night is over. But the idea between the railroad adventure, where the game master or the writer has, okay, this is the plot, and come hell or high water, the PCs are going to get in this, and they're just going to they're going to run through my little maze. That is I'm sure we'll discuss that could be poor adventure design. You have to be willing to be hands off. You can hope for the best and plan for the worst. I think actually that's the best way to sum it up in that kind of situation, because they'll no matter what it comes up, they'll come up with an idea that you never foresaw. So
and there are things that just plain don't work. I've found that I can never make time travel work completely, because it works fantastically in a
Time
novel
travel's hard.
when I'm directing it, but it works horrendously when you actually let players do it. So I wonder, are there any things that you just know plain won't work? Don't touch it; it'll suck.
Well, I think that's the challenge, right? Like, the great time travel adventure has not yet been written. And so, 6 months from now, you're going to be brokering this over in your brain, and you're going to find the way to make it work. Like all the old tropes, there's a great Giants adventure out there just dying to be written by someone who's passionate about whatever, like Scandinavian giants or ancient Norse myth, and they're going to finally incorporate that into something that, other people have done and is tired and is old and is boring. But somebody's going to find it, they're going to be passionate about it, and they're going to get that piece that's just right. And it could be time travel, which hasn't been done really well, or at least I haven't encountered it yet. It could be any one of these millions of exhausted tropes. And they're going to come across it, and because they're passionate about it, because they're working it over their head, they're going to find something that works. And so, which is different from what you were talking about, with character agency and railroads. I think, for all of us as judges, what we're really excited, the best part of our job, your job, is when we write something, the players go completely off the track. You're like, that's amazing. Like if they go to A to B to C, well, that's cool. It follows the plot, but I don't learn anything from that. When I said to them A, and they think around everything that I possibly could have come up with, that's the exciting part. That's new. That's what if a judge is willing to step back and make enough stuff up as they go and provide that that world for the players to play in, that's what we find exciting, right? That's when it's new to us, even though we created it. But that's different. Sorry.
From a practical writing aspect, I am very strong in the belief, because I sometimes function on both sides of the fence. Sometimes I'm the writer submitting to an editor, and sometimes I'm the editor having writers write for me, is just keys to good professional creative writing, one of which is never fall in love with your own ideas. Always be willing to go back and root it out if you think it doesn't work later, or you play test it and it obviously doesn't work. I mean, if you're writing a screenplay or a novel, that's still good advice. And if you work with a good editor, have somebody to bounce these things off of. And that can be players in a play test. Professionally, you can be an editor. I mean, Joseph will give notes sometimes. You know, not everything we turn in is perfect when we turn it in or publishable. That's, you know, to monitor the ego skin you have in the game. And that's saying it when I've done it. I've fallen so in love with an idea when I had it that I just want it in there, and somebody has to put their foot down and tell me no. And what I've learned as a professional writer is to always take that in, even when I disagree with it in my fingernail cuticles. I disagree with it. Take it in, look at it objectively, and even if it's me arguing back for the idea, the back and forth will change and evolve the idea, and it always comes out better in the end than what I started with. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And players are great for that. If you have an adventure you want to run it in a con with total strangers. You'll be amazed how much better it'll become if you can pull it off with strangers. You all have a style, you all have a relationship with your players. They know to expect certain things. You know, long ago before, when you work with writers and they're so used to explaining certain things, they'll turn in manuscripts sometimes before they've had a chance to publicly play test it, and there'll be gaping holes in the manuscript where they forgot to explain something, like how you got to the dungeon or what's in the second room, because they would either ad-lib it or it's so normal to them and their players to just skip that part, or it happens at the table and they don't, until you get in front of a public playtest group or give your module to a third party to actually playtest and you watch it or something, then you realize like, oh, I never actually described that at all. So yeah, just run it publicly with strangers, and that's a great way to get better.
Just to bring this sort of going around, I think one of the things you were kind of looking for a way, if it was possible, to kind of get the characters to, you know, get the characters from straying off completely, you know, where I mean, actually no writer has completely, if you talk to any fiction writer, they say the characters have a life of their own, you know, and after a while you may think like this is going, and then a novel will go entirely different way, you just have to go along for the ride. In your situation, if you have a plot line involved, and you don't want to be the railroad, like, okay, well, all right, well, you know, there's only one way out of town, and it's got to go this way. A good way to do that is to get the players invested in where you want them to go. I mean, if the big bad guy is a character that's been ongoing and has been a foil for the adventurers, you know, the players in actual time for like the last 6 months, and is constantly, you know, kind of been the thorn in their side and showing up. Now this is kind of the time where it comes time to confront him. Now the players, not even the characters, the players themselves, oh, I hate this, you know, it's like, oh, we're going to get him. They're going to be much more willing to go along with the ride and follow that, you know, and then it's not railroading, because now they're along for it, everybody's invested in it. So they're not like, you know, they're not the mule kind of in their traces trying to, you know, just dragging against the pull of it. So that's probably the best advice I can give. If you get the players, not just the characters, but the players themselves invested in the plot, they will tend to go. They'll forgive any railroading, because that's where they want to go anyway. So
I do like a lot more like a sandbox style, and what I try to do is just not make too many assumptions about what the players are going to do, or what characters are, how they're going to react. I mean, you never know. There's one party of, you know, the way the game, the players play is, you know, they're all want to be heroes or something. And then there's another party that's, you know, all drow that want to kill everybody or something. And just try not to assume too much. I at least try not to assume too much when I'm running adventures of, like, I guess make judgments about what the characters are going to want to do in the situation. I try to just like set up all the players, set up the stage for, you know, the real stars of the show, which are the players, to come in and do their thing.
Cool. So I have another topic for you guys. What do you do in quote real life to give you ideas for adventures or to make your adventures better? Obviously, other than gaming, but is it, you know, physical places you go? Do you have a retreat you go to write? Do you do certain activities? Are there people you hang out with? What sort of things inspire you to write better adventures? And I can go first if you want, or you want to go first?
I was just say I just go out and try to do new things. Go hiking. Saturday when I get back to Seattle, I'm going to go tap dancing. I'm taking a tap dancing class.
I can't wait for that event.
Is that off Sesame Street?
No. Just me and my girlfriend, we're going to go take a tap dancing class. But I don't know. I just try to say yes to just doing things that I've never done before, and I don't know. But you just break out of your own patterns, and feel like my thinking breaks out of patterns a lot of
No, I
times.
totally agree.
What were you going to say?
Well, yeah, so there's places, I live in California, and California is actually amazing. There's all these natural animal migrations that come through, so like you can watch the whales migrate in January, the butterflies come through in November. There's a spot near me where the elephant seals come, and first all the males fight, then they have the babies, and the babies swim away. But for like a couple months every year, you can see like animals the size of Volkswagens just sitting on beaches outside the city. So it's crazy. But so I do a lot of outdoorsy stuff. I just go into places that are weird or unusual, or things that will break the pattern of thought and make you think of new things, or make you encounter fresh stuff, whatever that might be.
Yeah, a couple weeks ago, we took a family vacation and we went to a Mammoth Caves down in Kentucky, and it was amazing. I mean, I've been in caves before, but that kind of takes it to a different level. And we hiked like 6 miles through the caves over the course of a couple of days, and it was very inspiring. It was amazing to actually, get in a cave, be in a cave, have them shut all the lights off on you, and that any kind of real life experiences like that you think are gonna translate or certainly will help out. So yeah, I think we all kind of look at that. I mean, I'm not the type of person to go and lay on the beach for a couple of days, but yeah, throw me in some caves, That sounds like a lot of fun. So because I could use that and everybody, all my coworkers were like, why are you going to Kentucky in caves? And I was like, well, it's like I kind of have another reason too. So it works out really good.
What do you guys
The answer spoke it really well.
Chain smoke and mainline caffeine. No. I love this because I call it the idea drawer. I have to go to the idea drawer to get new ideas for what I'm writing, and the idea drawer only replenishes itself at a certain speed. I mean, the speed can vary. So I'm an insatiable reader, and where Mike is an English lit major and reads a lot of English literature, I'm a science guy, so I read a lot of physics books that are over my head. And a lot of psychology, because besides fine art, I studied psychology in college. So right now I'm reading my way through an Appendix N author series and a book from 1976 called The Awakening of the Human Consciousness in the Bicameral Mind. And I get ideas out of that. I get ideas out of watching Mythbusters. I'm addicted to Mythbusters. And there's an amazing number of dungeon ideas. I've pulled some adventure plots from the old TV show Lost in Space, which was a very silly show, but there's a transmat device that accidentally beams Will Robinson to Earth in one episode. I put that in a Camera World adventure. My players were in the Appalachian Mountains, found one, and next thing they knew, they were in the post-apocalyptic Appalachian Mountains. They were on a jungle, and they thought they'd just been transported somewhere else to a jungle. 6 months later, they figured out they were on the Starship Warrior.
Wow.
And that came from a Lost in Space episode of all the silly things. So just mass media consumption along with my personal interest.
So let's talk about writing, since we titled this seminar How to Write Adventure Modules. I'm going to talk a little bit about reading submissions, and you guys, let's talk about how you actually convey it to the reader. How do you get this great adventure? But I can tell you from my own experience that when people turn in adventure submissions, when you play a game, you're in this world, right? You always want to convey that whole world to the reader, and so people often turn in submissions that have a very long introduction and lots of background material and the lineage of the king and his descendants and the nature of the kingdom, and they produce logs in this corner and they produce like whatever, they hunt animals in this corner, and a lot of background material. And it's very common for me to go through and say essentially you don't need 90% of this material to actually play the adventure. Frequently you need virtually none of it. You can get away with a couple of paragraphs of background and jump in. So I'll tell you, the advice I feel I give frequently to a lot of people, not these guys, but a lot of other people who I haven't worked with as long, is basically start the adventure right away, like cut to the chase. You don't need much background or introduction. Really, if you need more than like 2 or 3 paragraphs, you've got too much. Because the typical reader who wants to play an adventure, they're going to integrate it in their campaign, right? They have their own flavor, they have their own players, they're doing something already, they're already 6th level or whatever they are, and they just want to, you guys know, nobody buys an adventure and runs it exactly as written. You all adapt it somehow. So don't give them 4 pages of background that they're going to throw out anyway. Give them 4 paragraphs max, and then jump to the chase. In terms of how do you write it, right? You have to be very self-critical and actually go look and say, cool, I wrote my first draft, and now I'm going to go back and actually, like, my basic advice is essentially cut out 75% of the word count before the first area, because you probably don't need it. I don't know if you guys have advice on the actual writing part and how to communicate it.
I guess I'll jump on it. You know, I guess a lot of times, and this relates to the backstory of the module that you're writing, is you can, you know, if you have a lot of that material in the background or not, you know, it's only useful if there's a way to convey that to the players. And that could be through the use of handouts, through the use of NPC interaction. So if you are going to have those 2 or 3 pages as opposed to 2 or 3 paragraphs, you really have to be thinking, well, all right, and it could be great. It could be an amazing setup to a story. But if there's no way that the players can learn that, they're going to miss out on it, and then it just becomes a group of encounters. So if you're gonna really put a lot into your background, you got to really be thinking, how's that story going to be advanced, and how are the players going to learn that? You know, and you can't necessarily rely on the game master to fill those gaps in, because a lot of the game masters that are purchasing products, you know, they don't have that kind of time to do all that backstory. They want to grab something and run, and they want to run it. So you really need to be keeping that first and foremost in your mind.
Well, the joy is in playing the game, not in studying textbook.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's a convention in a lot of movies, you know, where it all comes together when the villain gives his speech at the end, you know. Then after he talks for 5 minutes, suddenly you understand it. In the adventure module, you need some mechanism to convey to the players, like all the pieces that come together, whether it's the background or the final connecting points, or what the plot was, or the underlying saga, or whatever. Yeah, that's a great point. It's either the villain's speech, or they find the villain's diary, or it's an NPC who interacts with them somehow, or they find it inscribed on the walls of the temple. You got to have some mechanism to convey the important information, and if you don't, it's just wasted background material.
And I have never met a group of player characters who will sit still for the villain speech.
Yes.
And then it's a roll for initiative. Let's get him.
Exactly. Yeah, it's got to happen fast.
My read aloud text is too long, and I know it. And I mean, obviously it's passing muster and getting published, but I know it's too long, and I'm working on that. And I guess I lied, because I'm looking at writers that I know can write those beautiful, concise sentences with a few words, like Henry Miller and Hemingway. So I've been looking at a little bit of that. Plus, Gary Gygax was really good at that. I mean, people think of High Gygaxian as this long and flowery, but Gary was very concise in how he would lay something out. The practical trip, I think we probably all heard this at some point in freshman comp or in college. I read my own read aloud texts aloud to myself,
yeah.
Because I'm impatient with long read aloud text. And as I read what I just wrote to myself, I immediately get a sense of, oh, no, that's got to go. That's too much. What were you thinking? Because in my head, it's different than when it comes out my mouth. When it comes out my mouth, I hear it.
And I love flowery language, but in the read aloud text, it's not good. If you're doing a word that you can't naturally pronounce and say. And if you go back to the original Gygax modules, we were talking about this today. You know, we turn in these adventures these days that are 64 pages or 32 pages or 96 pages. All the great adventures you remember from when you were a kid, Gygax wrote them all in 16 pages or less. It's staggering how short the original TSR modules are. Go back and read them again for inspiration. You can cram a ton of adventure in virtually no words if you do it right, and he did it right.
And I'd also say if you are really tied to this big backstory, see if you can trim it down to a couple paragraphs, like Joseph is saying, and see if you can't tell it in the adventure somewhere else. But you know, a lot of times, I'm trying to think of some adventures, but I've seen adventures, you know, where I don't know, like there's like a skeleton sitting on the throne or something, and there's a goblet and to the side, and the players already know, oh, well, the king was poisoned or something. Like they can put together this stuff, and you can tell them the story without like having this long read aloud text that only the DM's going to read and he's going to have to remember. Possibly.
They'll put together more than you think.
Right, yeah.
Any questions you guys have so far before we go on to the next topic? Are we that clear?
Well, obviously we write adventure modules that don't suck. So.
Feel free to defer this to later. Maybe it's a segue into a future topic. But can you name a few adventure modules that you think are really exemplary?
that we didn't write.
Right. I don't care who wrote them. If you are proud of your work and think that it's a good one for us to look at for inspiration, by all means.
Yeah, no, I was talking about Joe about this earlier today. So it's in the DCC line, but I didn't write it. Joe, one of the first adventures he did for Goodman Games was The One Who Watches From Below. And up to that point, many of our DCCs had been treading on, they were turned up to 11, but they were fairly traditional adventures. And they were definitely within the scope of what we think of adventures. And then Joe stepped up and, well, I don't want to give away the secret. He has a really amazing handout that you use at the table.
Don't
and
give away the secret. It's okay.
all right, if it's like
It's been
5
out.
years old.
It's not a spoiler for 2 years.
At some point, the character, a character possibly gets cursed, and then the player is forced, to wear this mask over their face, and all they can do is communicate with their eyes. That's freaking sweet, right? We've been gaming for 30 years. Why hasn't somebody done that yet? And I think that would marked a real breakwater for Dungeon Crawl Classics role-playing game line, because after that we were all like, all right, well, Joe did this thing that is so sweet. What can I come up with? What are my 8 cool ideas that I'm going to cram in here? And similarly, whether it's for your home game, because as judges we're always trying to provide really memorable experiences, or if it's something you're writing for publication, we should be trying to come up with really fun, exciting. Where did that idea come from, Joe?
Where did that
You
idea
didn't get that from where was
that from tap dancing?
No, I haven't taken the class yet.
Time travel.
I don't remember. I don't remember
He
anymore.
was trapped in a place where he could only communicate with his eyes. He was really scared looking back.
Yeah, and a bunch of stuff in that module was years of things I had thought about and kind of incorporated into some other at the table adventures. And then so that module was the first time that a publisher had totally let me loose and been write whatever you want. So thank you, Joe, for that. So you got the benefit of all this pent-up creativity that got slammed into one module.
Yeah. So that's my adventure that doesn't suck.
But just Harley and I were actually talking about this morning over breakfast, and I brought up the fact is that and Joe kind of just reiterated that, if at the end of whatever you're writing, your hour writing or something, if you look back and you see something that is in your adventure and you have no clue where that came from, that is a sign of brilliance. You're probably onto something right there, because you just tapped into the id. Some sort of this is burbled to the surface. I don't know where I came up with that idea, but that's a great idea. So if you can't follow logically the track to where an idea came from, chances are it's something that's nobody can get on here to sell. Chances are it's an idea that nobody else has seen before either.
So, but Michael Curtis, give us an adventure that doesn't suck.
Do I have an adventure that doesn't suck?
Name one.
Actually, I was just trying to think about that. There's some that you can appreciate from a judge's point of view reading, and then there's other that you appreciate if you're actually playing through. And I'm a firm believer is that there's no such thing as a terrible module in the hands of a great game master. They can make anything interesting. Some of the the worst railroad whatsoever in a genre that you wouldn't even like. And somebody who's really effervescent and is great and can handle it, can make it just hold you in the palm of your hand. I'm just trying to think. Maybe it's just because it's Friday here at GenCon. I was trying to think of the only one that really stand out for me is if anybody's familiar with the Call of Cthulhu adventure, The Haunting. It's basically the Keep on the Borderlands version of it. It's like the archetype for the Call of Cthulhu investigation. I mean, it has all the great little elements in there. It sucks you in. There's an adventure to be solved. It's a classic haunted house trope. And you're going in there, but at one point you get attacked by a bed. It's something that sounds really stupid, but there's a reason that I call it the Keep on the Borderlands of Call of Cthulhu, and it's literally 5 pages. So it's very succinct and it wraps everything up. That's my favorite. I've run that thing more than ever, and I just may be in love with it just because I love a good creepy story, But that was the one that jumped out of my head. It's something that's my apple.
All right, pass the mic.
Go.
I've got one, but bear with me because I'm going to lead in with why first. When I'm writing adventures, I try and think about what's the coin of trade of this adventure role-playing business to begin with. What do you win in a role-playing game? And my thesis is what you're winning is a good story and bragging rights. That's what you win when you come through these things. Even a TPK, if it happens spectacularly enough, can be a brag-worthy story that you tell years down the road. I mean, there's a whole convention of people that are telling character stories right now.
Yeah.
And the more brag-worthy the story, the more memorable the adventure. My favorite one, the adventure that blew our teenage minds in 1979 or 80 was Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, because we went in not knowing, right? I can spoil a 30-year-old adventure, right?
Enough time's gone by.
Adventure of the Barrier Peaks, Gary Gygax wrote it, very much based on Jim Ward writing Metamorphosis Alpha at the time, where a baron hires the player characters at a fairly high level to go investigate this cave that's spitting out strange monsters, and you get up there, and the cave is a module from a generational starship that crashed into Greyhawk. And you go in there with, you know, robots and aliens and mutants, and it's a murder factory adventure, just this side of Tomb of Horrors. So when we went through that as kids, it was the most amazing adventure ever because of the stories it generated about what did we do in this section, what did we do in that section. You know, we got jumped by robots and almost killed till the magic user polymorphed one of us into a rust monster, and then we didn't need key cards anymore because we just zapped through doors with the rust monster. You know, stuff like that. So
That's cool.
Adventure to the Barrier Peaks, to avoid being a corporate show and talk about how much I like Frozen in Time and Sailors and Star City. And the one who watches below, well, this will tie in specifically to the one who watches below. I was in a play test at a GenCon a few years ago before it was published with the one who watches below, and I managed to pull off a stunt that rescued half the party from a TPK, and I've walked around and talked about that ever since, and that's why the one who watches from below is one of my favorite DCC adventures.
That's cool.
I'd say Razor Coast, done a couple of years ago, I think a few years by this point. Not particularly enjoyable to read the way it's set up and formatted, but it's really like a big sandbox with a couple of story arcs done very, very well. Huge campaign setting. And in the old classic, the Saltmarsh series has always screamed to me because it had a little bit of everything, all three modules. You had, you know, classic trope, haunted house, investigation, assault a ship, lizard man lair in the swamp where you could use diplomacy or you could wipe them out, and then a big old bad fight in the third module underwater. So that kind of hit all the chords. And then you know, the classic I6 Ravenloft, which I think was you know, cool maps, cool villain, cool backstory, the whole, you know, prophecy thing with the tarot card reading. I think that one really captured a lot of imagination that will never be hit again on all those levels.
We will.
The first one that pops in my head is Paul/Janelle Jacquet's Caverns of Thracia. That one's really great, and it's got some really like complex maps, and there's a lot of like teleportation points where you go to this other land, and then you can find ways to come back again, and it's just very convoluted paths, and you can just make your own way through this thing, and players can go there multiple times and just never. It's so complex, I think. The way that I've run it before and played in it, it's like people talk about a totally different adventure each time because they like took different paths and went different places.
I've always liked Tomb of Horrors just because it's just like a death trap, and like you said, it is about bragging rights, and it's so hard to get anywhere in that adventure. And you play it, you hear about stories of people playing it 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, and never really making it that far. You know, you learn what to do or not to do at this encounter, but then you die. So then you try the next encounter, you make it one more in, and it's just the kind of adventure you all want to say you made it through, and not many people can actually say that. Cool. Any other questions you guys have? Yes.
Hang on. When I'm writing a horror campaign, it's a lot easier for me to deal with getting the players into that kind of emotion because I can set props up, I can work over the course of several different sessions to kind of set that oppressive kind of dread for a horror setting. If I wanted to write a module, something I expect to run in 1-2 sessions, how would I properly go about conveying that emotion? Or is horror just something that would be best enough to not show game like this?
I mean, horror, like comedy, I mean, it's subjective. It's really, I mean, the thing that can totally freak out, freak out one reader is just like, yeah, whatever, it's somebody else. So, yeah, I mean, that's a difficult one to tackle. brought up Ravenloft. I mean, you know, and that's a classic one, and that I mean that could work in the right in the right, if you have the proper context for it and a proper group of it. And again, I guess a lot of it comes down to what I was saying about player investment. I mean, because if you can get them invested in the module and care about the events which is going to happen to them, it's a much more easier to drag them into that, to get them invested in that, and then to get that fear factor on it. But because for the most part, I'd say it's easier if you're writing an adventure for like your home group than if you're trying to write one for commercially, because you have no idea what your audience is going to be on a commercial level. If you're writing something for your home group, you know what their buttons are, you know their hot issues, you know how far you can take them and then get them to give the heebie-jeebies and stuff. And sometimes it might just be a soundtrack played at the right time, or like me personally, I dislike slugs. I mean, I've stepped on them barefoot in my time. They still give me the heebie-jeebies. So if I was in an adventure like, hey Mike, you fall in this room, and then you look around, there's slugs, and they start crawling on you, and this and that, I would be like, all right, that's it, I'm out. But I don't know. Does anybody else have a way that you can kind of like a broad audience for that, or?
Actually, maybe a different way of saying it is, the con experience versus the play-at-home experience, whether it's horror or another genre. And at cons, people just play differently. Usually you play without continuity. You're not concerned about whether your character survives as much because you're not going to be playing tomorrow night. So at least what I see is people do a lot more last-ditch kind of stuff, take more risks. They just behave differently at cons, as opposed to at home where you don't want to lose that character you've been playing with for the last couple months. So just know you can approach it differently. I assume players will take more risks and be more daring at con adventures. I don't know if you guys have any more.
I want to phrase this carefully. I run for Joseph, I run a group called the Cabal that's largely comprised of third-party publisher writers that we collaborate together where we do a tournament funnel and everybody writes a section. And in doing one of those, I got back a submission. This is not me being prudish, but it was more profane than I knew Joseph would publish or be comfortable with. A very specific digestive track dungeon section of an Elder God with a lot of things in there that I don't think would work at an all ages table. So my editorial direction back to this particular writer was to think of it more in terms of Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith, who didn't need to resort to those types of specifics to engender that sense of dread and horror as events build up. And the writer took the notes and came back with something that was just as scary, just as creepy, but didn't involve anal polyp monsters and fecal matter, interdimensional fecal matter. I'm like, okay, well that's still.
I will say that D&D got it right because the way that D&D, classic D&D, instills fear in it is that like the worst monsters drain experience points, and that
levels.
Levels or so that doesn't get the character, that gets the player like, oh my god, it's like you're wiping out all my my personal investment, all my personal accomplishment. So that's one of those situations where if you can scare the player rather than the character, I mean that's definitely the way to go. I'm not saying drain level, but I'm saying if you can get that, if you can get the equivalent of level drain into your to your audience, that they'll be like, okay, all right, yeah, we're leaving now. That's it.
Joe, you seem to have experience with that, the way you laughed.
No.
You seem especially pleased with that idea.
I was thinking about the polyp monster stuff.
Well, I mean, I don't know why I feel this need to be super clear and politically correct. If I was editing a different adventure for, say, Lamentations of Flame Princess, then who cares? That's the target audience for, more out there content than, Dungeon Crawl Classics. So it's not me being a prude or judging it in any way. And as individual judges and table by table, it's important to know your players because some players will have triggers that you'll discover and you just don't want to put that in your game.
Well, actually, let's talk about knowing your players, not in that way, but just writing to a group. Because there's, the classic D&D trope assumes that you have basically, a cleric. You always have to have a cleric. You have to have a thief, etc. Have you guys ever written adventures where you turn those assumptions on their head, right? The old story of, you were one that was the old thief adventure. Remember?
Stardust.
Yeah.
Sure.
Sort of.
Yeah. I mean, and then Mike just came off of Lightmar.
And then just
Sorry.
phrase it better in real quick.
Oh,
So in a dungeon, always make sure there's a key there.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking metaphorically, so I mean, it's just, doesn't necessarily have to be a dungeon door. It could be anything. It could be, if you have a plot, if you have a mystery and there, either you require a clue in order to decipher it. Don't just put one clue in there and lead it down to, okay, they have to make the skill roll in order to find this clue. I mean, if you follow the rule of three, like, okay, if it's a mystery, make sure that there are 3 clues that will allow them to, to move on to the next phase, or make sure that there's 3 ways to get through the impenetrable door, whether it be a thief picks the lock or you find the key or you know the magic password or something like that. Because if you make any of these assumptions, especially for a published adventure, because you don't know what the makeup is going to be, what they're going to get around to it, they may not have that cleric, or they may not have that half dragon, half specter, werefleet, dire prestige class, or something that you've envisioned is necessary to move that on. So yeah, so make branching paths rather than a single straight trail. I think that's the best way to go around it. With Lankbar, we've set up very much so. I mean, that we assume that there will be wizards and there will be thieves and there will be warriors. But we've actually worked in mechanics that allows you to you don't necessarily need any one of those. So we try to put, again, if it's a whole bunch of wizards, obviously there's going to be a lot of magic use, and they can accomplish it doing magic use. Or if there's going to be all thieves, they can be stealthy and so this, or they can just be all warriors and kick in the front door and solve problems with the old, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, that kind of mentality. So.
Not to be like, I don't know, silly, but like the any character's strongest power is not listed on the character sheet, right?
Right.
It's like, so if there needs to be room for player creativity to move around and create in this world. And so it's when we become trapped in our character sheets that, and this is why playing with kids is so much fun, right? Because like a kid doesn't know they have power X, Y, or Z, and they haven't read what the hell Magic Missile does, but they know that their character can do anything in this world, so they're going to come up with a million ideas that we as adults that are trying to game the game system aren't going to come up with. And so similarly, when you present an adventure, you want to provide space for creative solutions that I as the author never understood or couldn't come up with. And so it's okay, especially in DCC where the rules are fairly fluid, to set an impossible challenge, knowing that if it telegraphs that it's an impossible challenge, the players, being smart people, are going to come up with some crazy solution that has nothing to do with the 5 things that I left in the room to come up with. They're going to come up with a solution that only that 5 group of players could ever, they're the ones that could only come up with that idea to deal with that challenge, and you just leave them the room to move.
And that's the best when it happens.
Right.
When you're like, oh, I didn't think of that. It works.
Yes. Yes.
I have a perfect example of that. Just when I played with my 8-year-old daughter, we played some Labyrinth Lord adventure, and it was the first time she'd ever played D&D type of game, and she came to a locked door for the first time, and I was like, you turn the door and it's locked. And she's like, okay, well, I walk up the stairs back to the woods. And I'm like, okay. She's like, all right, I'm going to look for a beaver. Okay, find a beaver. I still didn't even know where she was going with this. And we went down with a stream, and she like captured a beaver, and then she went back to the door, and she held the beaver to the door, and it shooted through the door. I was like, oh, okay, I've never thought of that.
That's pretty good. And on both, to what you both said, so as a publisher, I look at an adventure and I want the players to have fun playing it, right? They might die or they might live, but you should always have fun. If your typical D&D party has 4 classes, right? There's always the wizard, the warrior, the thief, and the cleric. They should all shine. So when I get adventures that have no undead, right, or there's not a single locked door in the adventure, or
they forgot to include the beaver.
Oh, they right, yes, the beaver-free dungeon. But for every sort of 4 to 6 encounters, every class should have some chance to shine in that set of encounters. And not predictably as there's always a locked door, there's always an undead, but something that lets every class feel special along the way. That's great. But to your point, I also love it when you write an adventure and you don't really know how they're going to, like, it's okay to write encounters where you don't really know if it's going to be survivable at all, and then go run it for some players and see if they come up with a solution. I have an adventure in the back of the DCC core book with the Portal into the Stars, which I personally run probably like 3 dozen times, and I've heard stories from many, many gamers who run it, and a guy told me today about he ran it for his group, and they had a solution to a room that I'd never heard before. And it was just really cool that his players came up with a solution to a room that I've never heard of, and dozens and dozens and dozens of times of either playing it or hearing it played. And that's cool. It's awesome when that happens.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can't believe nobody ever thought of that before.
Well, I mean, that's
But-
really the magic of our hobby, right? And
Yeah.
that's what we're here for.
That almost goes back to the very first question that that young lady asked, where the answer is, don't worry about it too much.
Yeah, that's true. Play your adventure. See if the players come up with anything you never would have thought of, and maybe they'll figure it out on their own. Yeah. Well, guys, we have about 5 more minutes. Any last topics or last questions before we close out? Now they all come. Why don't we start here? We'll see if we can.
Speed round.
Basically, what I'm just trying to figure out is what are any kind of like pitfalls or any major differential things that you have to do between writing for like your own close knit type friends and trying to spread it out to more of a mass market type of thing.
Lightning round.
All right, real quick. Make sure you write out your ideas and give them to somebody else to read, because they will read it and discover the gaping holes that you didn't realize you even had.
Yeah, give it to another judge or GM and have them run the game, and they'll come back with like tons of notes. Seriously.
This is everything you could have done better.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Give it to somebody else to run.
Yeah.
Play test, blind play test, not you running it, somebody else running it. You can sit in and take notes, but you will get an amazing amount of feedback from. And if you have people who play. There's some groups out there that they just play test. That's what they do, and they rip things to shreds, and they're really good at it. But that's by far you'll learn a lot about your plot and your encounters just by doing that.
And be willing to take it in even when you disagree with it and look at the feedback.
Yeah, good call. All right, one more question over here. Go ahead.
I've been thinking about when you said there's not really like bad adventure tropes like time traveler,
Oh,
it's
yeah,
just
right.
the ones nobody's figured out how to do right yet.
Absolutely.
What are examples either of ones you feel like we're still waiting for, like the one with dinosaurs that works, or like the one where you spend half of it underwater and it's not annoying, or like what? What are the ones, like,
You're nailing it. Like me. but I really believe that passionately.
Right.
I mean, like what you said, like, there is an awesome time travel adventure out there. We just haven't figured out the mechanic yet. And somebody's gonna have a cardboard cutout, and I don't know, they're gonna figure out a way to do it, and we just haven't seen it yet. I mean, you look at Red and Pleasant Land, right? Like Alice in Wonderland, vampires. Oh my God, it's done to death. No, it's brilliant. And so, those adventures exist. They can totally be done. All it takes is an author being passionate about it. Wanting to put your particular unique take. I mean, we live in a hobby where we're not passive. Like, all you people are creators. Creators. You're all creating stuff for your games. And so, I mean, there's nothing particularly special about the people sitting at the head of the room. You all have something that you're particularly passionate about, and it's just a matter of thinking it through enough, and then putting all your thoughts into it and making it really, really cool.
It requires a passion because it also requires hard work.
Sure, but that's everything.
I was just saying, what are things that make your adventure suck? What things
Right.
that,
No, that was
things
good.
you
Yeah.
don't want to do?
I was wondering about
one
that.
each. We'll go a couple
Okay.
sentences each. Who
I'm
wants
gonna start with
first?
Mike Curtis.
What my invention is? What, you want my onion? Is that what
Yeah, we gave our apples. What's your onion?
apples and onions? Oh God. Oh my God. Anybody pressing? One that I absolutely hated.
Not the adventure you hate, but all, like a specific aspect of adventure writing, or
Part of the adventure.
What makes an adventure suck?
Yeah, exactly.
That's like an element.
The part that I don't like, or
Yes.
no.
We have stumped him.
Yeah. Oh God.
Here, why don't Chris?
Okay.
We'll go back.
I'll say we already talked about it, but that choke point and the locked door, that's not necessarily the metaphor for the locked door, but that choke point where they have to do X, Y, or Z to move the adventure forward, and them getting stumped, and it can be very frustrating for players, and you need to try and avoid that.
One for me is a linear map.
Yeah.
If there's just one conga line that they're traveling through, or just not very many choices that they can make, that just kills an adventure for me.
Yeah. I mean, you might have picked up on it, but too much backstory, just lots and lots of convoluted backstory that doesn't apply to most groups. I'd rather have stuff that can apply to most people most of the time and just get moving.
I actually catch myself doing this, but what annoys me are just tropes that are where no effort was made to expand the trope. The opposite of what Harley was talking about. I mean, you can find a new creative approach on any cliche or trope, but you just walk in and there's an emo drought. I'm done. I'm putting it down at that point. Or
the personal thing is, you gotta get Zemo. I think for me, I deserve to be flogged every time I write a door with a strength check, and I've done it. It's, I deserve to be flogged. If
Is that bad? Because I've got that going on right now.
Take it out, quick.
Okay, all right. I take that note.
Before it's too late. Yeah. No. If the roll doesn't matter, if they're gonna stand there and like, okay, you know, I picked the lock. Well, no, you tried. Can I try it again? Yes. I mean, if the roll doesn't matter, don't include it. And I am
agility checks.
I am guilty of that 100 times
Yeah.
over. If the roll does matter, if the door is locked, you needed 25 to break it down because the giant's coming behind you, then the roll matters. But if the roll doesn't matter, if it's just a locked door and they have all the time in the world, whatever. Find the beaver and chew it down.
Thank you. That's the problem. That's 30 years of gaming is what that is. Is that because
Well, why haven't I learned yet?
No, I mean, we've grown up on that. Like that was kind of like that's how we were taught because that's what we read. How the adventures were. Like there were, basic D&D. There was you had to roll to check every door if you could open it, whether it was locked or not. There was this.
It's stuck. I need a 2 on a 1d6.
Exactly. So I mean that's ingrained, and falling too much prey of that.
Yeah,
that's the part of the work. And I'm guilty of that just as well.
That's why you all are going to be better writers.
Right.
Than I am.
Don't do what we do. And
that was much better.
Write adventures instead. Don't suck.
Thanks a lot, guys. If you have any tickets, if you didn't get a chance to bring them up, just bring them up at the end. And thanks for your time.